3 people have died after a fire broke out in a flat in Bedok North, leaving a scene of devastation. 20.4 kilos, that's one of the largest hauls of cannabis in recent years. And Singapore's Met service records one of the hottest days ever last month. Hello, you're watching The Big Story with me, Olivia Quay. Remember to subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss an episode. A 3-year-old child is among 3 people who have died in a fire which broke out this morning in an HDB flat at Block 409 Bedok North Avenue 2. The affected unit is on the 4th floor, and when SCDF personnel arrived at around 6:40 a.m., they found 4 unconscious people there. The toddler, the mother and father, who are the flat's tenants, were taken to hospital where the toddler and father died from their injuries. The mother remains in critical condition. Another woman, understood to be the flat's owner, was pronounced dead at the scene. While SCDF says the flat had a vast accumulation of combustible items, the cause of the fire is still under investigation. Well, I spoke to my colleague, journalist Jessie Lim, who was at Block 409 earlier today. So Jessie, you've been at the scene from about 8:35 a.m. Can you describe what you saw since that moment up until now?
Sure. So when I arrived on the scene, there were many policemen surrounding the block, and there were also SCDF officers who were present as well. Many residents were there, but they didn't know what was going on. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of worry. Some of them had seen the fire with their own eyes, but they didn't know, how bad the casualties were, whether there were any fatalities. And we understand that the fire took place at about 6:30 a.m. in the morning, and the firefighters used a jet hose to put out the flames. That was what I saw when I was down in the morning. And over the course of the morning, the MP for the East Coast GRC, Mr. Tan, also came down to reassure residents and to check on those who were affected. And he told us that efforts are going to be made to help the family as much as possible, to ensure that they have alternative housing, and of course to follow up with all the necessary assistance that they may need.
Well, Jessie, we can see the damage done to the affected unit behind you. Could you share more on what the unit's neighbours or other residents of Block 409, what have they told you about what transpired this morning?
I spoke to the neighbour who was right next to the affected unit, and he mentioned to me how when he first woke up, he heard there was an explosion, there were people knocking frantically on his door, asking him to evacuate immediately. And there was a lot of chaos, but what helped was that the neighbours, they really looked out for each other. They knocked on each other's doors, banged on the doors, to alert them that had been a fire. And some of them even helped the seniors, the older ones who were less mobile, to piggyback them out of their units. And from what I heard from the MP, residents from the nearby market opposite the block, even though they were having breakfast, they rushed down and as much as possible tried to make sure that everybody was safely evacuated from the block. And by the time I arrived, all the residents were mostly just standing around the block, waiting for everything to be okay so they could return to their homes safely.
All right, many thanks to journalist Jessie Lim. In other news, bookings for Nuvaxovid will be available from today for residents 18 years old and above, but appointments are only from May the 18th at 20 participating public health preparedness clinics, as well as at the Joint Testing and Vaccination Centre in Bishan from May the 24th. Well, those receiving the Nuvaxovid vaccine for their primary series are recommended to get the 2 doses at least 21 days apart, while those taking it as a booster are recommended to receive it from about 5 months after their last dose. Well, this vaccine is the first non-mRNA vaccine recommended as a booster dose by the Expert Committee on COVID-19 Vaccination. Also in the headlines, about 20.4 kilos of cannabis were found at one block in Brattle Hill this week, making it one of the largest hauls of the drug in recent years. During CNB's 5-day crackdown, nearly $1.2 million worth of narcotics were seized and 102 individuals arrested. Other drugs recovered include heroin, ice and new psychoactive substances. And in an exclusive by my colleague journalist Ang Qing, Singapore saw one of the hottest days on April the 1st at 36.8 degrees Celsius in Admiralty. Well, this is just 0.2 degrees shy of the all-time record logged almost 40 years ago. Typically, the months of April and May are hot periods for Singapore due to inter-monsoon conditions. The Meteorological Service Singapore tells the Straits Times that this week, the temperature shot to 35.6 degrees at Paya Lebar and Marina Barrage between 2 and 3 p.m. on Tuesday. And this month may be hotter than usual, with temperatures averaging 28.9 degrees Celsius today. But even as the weather is warmer, the Met Service says Singapore isn't experiencing a heat wave. Ang Qing shares more.
So some people might have seen 42 degrees or 43 degrees on their phone earlier this week, on Tuesday specifically. But we're actually not currently experiencing a heat wave according to NEA. So in Singapore, a heat wave occurs when the daily maximum temperature is at least 35 degrees Celsius on 3 consecutive days. And the daily mean temperature throughout that period is at least 29 degrees Celsius. So given this definition, it does not qualify for a heat wave, what we've been experiencing so far. In fact, the last heat wave occurred in 2016. And based on past records, Singapore experienced on average 1 or 2 heat waves per decade. So even though you feel a lot hotter now, it doesn't actually qualify as a heat wave. So members of the public can protect themselves against the heat by taking measures such as wearing lightweight clothing, staying hydrated, drinking enough water, using sunscreen and staying in the shade where possible while you're outdoors.
Team Singapore has their second gold medal at the SEA Games in an all-Singapore final in the women's épée individual event. 14-year-old debutante ELLE edging out defending champion Keriatakana Abdul Rahman 12-11. The 1-2 taking Singapore's medal tally to 2 golds, 6 silvers and 5 bronzes. 2 of those medals coming from Wushu today as well, with Jessie Lim taking home silver in the men's Changquan. Despite having the same overall scores as Malaysia's Clementing, the Malaysian was awarded the gold because the detailed scores showed he had 0.001 of a point more because of a more complex routine. And Chan Chin Kai adding Singapore's second Wushu medal, a bronze in the men's Tai Chi Chuan, behind Malaysia and the Philippines. Elsewhere, U.S. President Joe Biden hosting ASEAN leaders at the White House on Thursday as he pledges support for the bloc in the face of a rising China. Opening a 2-day summit, he also announced over $150 million of programs for clean energy, maritime security, education and public health. ASEAN's leaders will take part in plenary sessions with Mr. Biden and U.S. cabinet secretaries later today, following a lunch with U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. And posting about the summit on social media, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong says this is the first in-person meeting between President Biden and the ASEAN leaders. He also mentions meetings with the U.S. ASEAN Business Council and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, among other sessions, calling the day busy but fruitful. Sri Lanka has a new Prime Minister, a political veteran who faces his greatest challenge yet. Ranil Wickremesinghe, seen on the left, was sworn in for the 6th time as PM on Thursday, taking his oath before President Gotabaya Rajapaksa in his office. Now, the president's brother, Mahinda Rajapaksa, resigned as Prime Minister on Monday after violent attacks by his supporters on peaceful protesters who demanded the government step down. Joining us is correspondent Rohini Mohan, who reported from Sri Lanka last month but is back in India and tracking the developments from there. Good to have you back, Rohini. So, with a familiar name back in the spotlight as Prime Minister, can Mr. Wickremesinghe get Sri Lanka out of its deepening economic crisis?
Actually, Ranil Wickremesinghe for a long time was actually seen as the only man for the job. Not because he's really good, but how bad the others are and how little trust the other politicians have among the people right now. Ranil Wickremesinghe has served as a Prime Minister 5 times before this, the 6th appointment, and this would mean that he has to actually put together what is called an interim government, and ministers will have to be appointed to settle Sri Lanka's economic crisis. Ranil Wickremesinghe is seen as someone who has the education, he's a lawyer, and the experience as a politician, and also the international credibility to actually kind of help Sri Lanka come out of its crisis. But there's a lot of jokes around who he is, also because he's never served a full term as Prime Minister. He's seen as very unlucky, but also really lucky to keep coming back to power like this. There's been cartoons in the biggest local dailies where he's shown as wearing the maroon scarf that the Rajapaksas have as a tie, because the UNP is seen as a liberal party that would bring in sort of investments, capitalistic way of governing and smaller government. So this is something that they're seeing him in a suit, and that is that is kind of telling about where the direction of Sri Lanka's economy will go today.
Well, Rohini, you were in Sri Lanka a few weeks ago and you saw firsthand a country on the verge of bankruptcy. So what's the international community doing to help find a solution to the crisis?
After a much delayed attempt to fix its economic problems, Sri Lanka finally got a financial delegation to meet with the International Monetary Fund, which is expected to give a sort of bailout. But just before that, a few days before that, Sri Lanka had announced that it's bankrupt and that it can't really repay any foreign loans. Since then, humanitarian aid has been given by Bangladesh, India, and some other countries that are actually sending medicines. They're also giving credit lines, especially India is doing that. It's giving credit line for fuel, which is extremely short right now, and several petrol and diesel stations are shut down. There's also no gas, and people have moved on to using firewood, even in cities and apartments, and that's how desperate the situation is now. There is expectation that once the IMF comes in with some sort of it will bring in some sort of credibility, and then Sri Lanka can approach other countries like Japan, maybe even China, with whom there is a sort of tiff now after many years of borrowing from China. China has gone quiet over the last few months because also people were really upset with the Rajapaksa government's closeness to China, so they're playing it quiet right now. But several other possibilities will emerge once the IMF comes in and plays the mediator for Sri Lanka with other governments. But all this will have to depend on a stable government in position that is not corrupt, that is transparent, that people are able to back and are satisfied with. So there's a lot to do domestically before a lot of help can come from outside.
India correspondent Rohini Mohan there in Bangalore. Thanks very much, Rohini. Don't forget that you can follow developments on what's happening in Sri Lanka on our website at str.sg/Asia. Find out more on how its new Prime Minister plans to steer the island nation through its economic crisis. Also visit straitstimes.com for more news and our YouTube channel. For more videos, subscribe by hitting the red button below. I'm Olivia Quay and I'll see you next week on The Big Story. Enjoy the long weekend.